Carla, what would you like to add on that? Because portraying science and making it, compelling, it's, not easy. I mean, we were talking about, the marbles. I guess they were marbles or stones or whatever, showing the progress. I mean, that was a great, obviously a great use there. What did you think? How did he do on the science there, Carla?
Well, actually, I just saw the movie, and I'm still under the spell of the movie. So first thing, I think, Christopher, I think you did a masterpiece. I'm strongly affected by the movie. I think it's wonderful. Chuck, allow me to say that I think everybody should see this movie because not only because it's fantastic, but because what it raises, the kind of questions that it raises, are not just about the 40s and about general issues about morality of scientists and things like that. They're questions, they're burning questions today. The doomsday clock that is supposed to estimate the risk of nuclear catastrophe has never been closer to midnight. So we are in a situation in which the kind of concerns that Oppenheimer was expressing in this confused way are our concerns today. And I think this is what the movie brings out so strongly. And Oppenheimer, who keeps saying international cooperation is the only way out, seems to me a message that at least we should discuss more and more in a situation in which it seems that all the countries are going the opposite direction. Instead of looking for international cooperation, so much of international politics is about prevailing against one another, leading the world, being the winning one against the other. And the risk of a catastrophe is enormous. So I think the intensity of the movie is also because it touches a real risk, which is now. And these images in which Oppenheimer himself sees his friend being sort of burned alive, I think should talk to all of that and make us think. And that's why I think we should all see this movie.
Let me just add one thing about the science. It's not just simply the science itself, but the scientific process that Chris has captured so beautifully. The central issue that it comes out in your book and then in the movie very strongly of the contrast between this security system that needs compartmentalization and doing the science successfully and doing the science quickly, which requires openness. It requires that people working on different aspects of the problem communicate about what they're working on, because what this person is doing in that area will influence what happens with this person in this area. And if you have compartmentalization, you're dead. It'll take far, far longer. And this comes out very nicely in the movie. And that, in some ways, understanding that is in some ways more important than understanding the science, understanding the scientific process and how it works.
Talk about, you portrayed that. What was the hardest part of portraying the science? What was your biggest challenge, and how did you think was the best way to attack it?
Well, the hardest part was, I visited the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton to see about filming there, and indeed they did very generously let us film there in Einstein's office and the real pond that they would walk by. But the then director, Robert Digraph, another brilliant physicist who could sit on this panel, and he very generously gave me some of his time to talk about, quantum physics, to talk about these things, the revolutionary nature of what Oppenheimer was visualizing, because I wanted to jump in his head and see these things and feel them, to have some kind of almost threat to them, that he's almost having visions, put it that way, in order to make it clear to the audience the revolutionary and almost magical nature of this shift from classical physics to quantum physics. And in talking to Robert, he immediately said, well, of course, one of the things that scientists at the time found alienating about this shift is you can no longer visualize the atom. Now, to a filmmaker who's about to try and film the
I was just going to say, you can't visualize it.
Exactly. Then
it's a visual medium.
Exactly.
Right.
So what do I do? So he generously gave me a couple of hours. He sort of sat there and talked about it. And in the end, in talking it through with him, we sort of realized that the advantage that cinema has is, Eisenstein referred to it in editing many years ago shot A plus shot B gives you thought C. So, you know, it could be more, the thought could be more than the sum of its parts, the whole. And so I went to Andrew Jackson, my visual effects supervisor of several films, showed him the script very early on and said, okay, we want to do these things without computer graphics. We want to have a thread of imagery sort of starting with these very first sort of visions, this sense of, you know, what these guys were doing is they were looking into dull matter and seeing energy that could ultimately be released in the destructive power of the atomic bomb. And we wanted a kind of set of experimental visuals that could create this thread of what I kept referring to as sort of scintillating or vibrating energy that could mirror his own nervous state as well, but also show you the quantum physics as it manifests itself ultimately in the destructive power of the bomb.
Speaking of the destructive power of the bomb, I don't know why I expect, maybe others did too. I expected to see carnage. And there is imagery. In fact, my son came with me to the screening, and he was asking about that. I said, don't you remember the charred shadow that he walked through and all that? I was explaining this to him. But you didn't hit us over the head with it. Yeah, that was clearly a choice. Why?
I think really, as a filmmaker, you can't be overly conscious about why you choose to do things. You have to run on instinct to a degree. But the feeling for me as a filmmaker was very strongly that to depart from Oppenheimer's experience would betray the terms of the storytelling. And so we saw so much more, we know so much more than he did at the time. Discovering from Kai's book that he learned about the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki on the radio, the same as the rest of the world. That to me was a shock.
This is very intentional with this movie, that this is most of the movie and is his point of view.
Yeah.
And then when you're in black and white, it's in Strauss's point of view.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very, very sort of rigidly with the color sequences. Everything is his experience or my interpretation of his experience. Because as I keep reminding everyone, it's not a documentary. It is an interpretation. That's my job. And so I wanted to.
Would you classify it as docudrama?
No, I think
Really?
it's drama. I think it's narrative, dramatic filmmaking. I think that whilst I do think the film is perhaps more accurate than some people might think, coming to it fresh, because there are sort of extraordinary things. I mean, to take one example, when you read American Prometheus and you learn that, his tutor at Cambridge, Patrick Blackett, who's the guy played by James Darcy, who he tries to poison.
Right.
He later on is the first physicist to really write questioning America's motives in dropping the bomb on Japan. Now, no screenwriter would invent that. It's far too seemingly fanciful.
Right.
But that's the truth. And the film is full of those things. And so a lot of the things, when Kitty Oppenheimer is testifying,
right.
That's from the transcript.
Well, I was just going to say, having so much, that transcript, you're handed.
Yeah, 1,000 pages.
Imagine not having that.
Transcript. No, I can't.
Right.
No, and I never would have taken the project on without Kai and Marty's incredible work. I mean, that gave you sort of confidence. But yes, to come back to the choices of what to portray or not, to me, it's really about staying in his head. There's also, I would say, a recurring motif. I mean, I don't, deal too much in spoilers for people who haven't seen the film, if people are writing about it, but. Right. There's a lot to do with what he won't look at. There's a lot to do with him closing his eyes.
My favorite retort, though, that you said about that, you were worried about spoilers, and then you said, well, there's Google. Right? This all happened. It's not like, No, don't tell anybody. Exactly. There's 2 bombs.
It's
right?
It's a strange thing to say, to talk about spoilers. But of course, and that's why it's not a drama. Not a documentary or a docudrama, because it's the way in which you receive the story that hopefully creates suspense, hopefully creates surprise.